The haunted tutorial. Harlow and Chris, a young couple in their mid-20s, were spending a quiet evening at Harlow's apartment. The rain outside added to their cozy night in as they lounged on the couch, scrolling through YouTube. After a few mundane videos, they stumbled upon a DIY tutorial titled How to Summon Spirits, a beginner's guide. With a shared smirk, they decided to watch it, intrigued by the ridiculousness of the idea. The video host, an overly enthusiastic man in his 40s, began explaining the steps with dramatic flair. Harlow and Chris laughed, exchanging playful jabs about the absurdity of it all. "Do people actually believe this stuff?" Harlow chuckled, nudging Chris. He grinned back. "I bet we could do it better." The initial atmosphere was lighthearted and filled with amusement, neither of them taking the tutorial seriously. Little did they know, their evening was about to take a dark and sinister turn. Harlow and Chris, still chuckling, decided to give the spirit summoning ritual a try, more as a joke than anything else. They gathered the items mentioned in the tutorial: candles, a small mirror, and a piece of chalk. With everything set up on the living room floor, they lit the candles and dimmed the lights, still mocking the video seriousness. As they began following the steps, drawing symbols on the floor and chanting the suggested phrases, the atmosphere in the apartment started to shift. The playful banter between them quieted, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Chris, glancing around, noticed the lights flickering slightly. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice dropping. Harlow shrugged, trying to laugh it off, but she felt it too. A cold breeze that seemed to come from nowhere, brushing past her skin. They continued the ritual, their laughter now nervous and forced. The room felt colder, and the flickering lights grew more pronounced. Suddenly, they both heard it. Faint, distant whispers that seemed to echo around them. Harlow's eyes widened, and Chris felt a chill run down his spine. "Okay, this is getting weird," he said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the tremor in his voice. The playful experiment was turning into something far more unsettling, and they could both feel it. The strange occurrences began to escalate. As Harlow and Chris sat frozen, the candles flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move on their own in the corners of their vision. Suddenly, a book flew off the shelf, landing with a loud thud. Harlow jumped, her heart racing, and Chris's face went pale. "We need to stop this," he said, reaching for the remote to pause the video. They hoped stopping the video would end the disturbances, but the silence that followed was anything but comforting. The room seemed to pulse with a menacing energy. The temperature dropped further, their breath visible in the cold air. Objects began to move more aggressively. A chair scraped across the floor, and a picture frame fell from the wall, shattering the glass. Harlow clutched Chris's arm, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" she whispered, fear evident in her eyes. Chris shook his head, unable to answer. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and now seemed to come from right beside them. Shadows darted around the room, flickering just beyond the candlelight, and a sinister presence seemed to loom over them. Despite their efforts to stop the ritual, the paranormal activities continued to intensify. Lights flashed, and an eerie, disembodied voice began to echo their names. Harlow and Chris were trapped in a nightmare that was rapidly spiraling out of control, and the sense of impending doom was palpable. The apartment plunged into chaos. The lights burst one by one, plunging the room into darkness, while furniture shook violently. An eerie, disembodied voice called out their names, growing louder and more menacing with each repetition. Chris and Harlow clung to each other, terror gripping their hearts. Suddenly, Harlow was pulled toward the mirror by an invisible force. She screamed for Chris, her fingers clawing at the air. "Help me, Chris!" she cried, her voice filled with desperation. Chris lunged forward, but it was too late. He watched in helpless horror as Harlow was dragged into the mirror, her terrified face disappearing into the glass surface. Silence fell. Chris stood alone in the now quiet apartment, staring at the mirror. His reflection looked back, but Harlow was gone. The reality of what had just happened was incomprehensible, leaving him in a state of shock and disbelief. Subscriber from the other side. Cyrus, an enthusiastic 21-year-old aspiring YouTuber, lived with his 19-year-old sister, Tia. Passionate about his channel, Cyrus spent hours researching and creating content. One sunny afternoon, he excitedly uploaded a new video discussing urban legends and myths, eager to see the response. Tia, supportive yet skeptical, watched as Cyrus monitored the video's performance. Shortly after the upload, Cyrus noticed a new subscriber, Watcher in the Dark. This mysterious user began leaving cryptic comments on the video, referencing obscure details from the legends. At first, Cyrus and Tia found the comments strange but laughed them off as typical internet trolling. "Probably just someone trying to get a reaction," Cyrus shrugged, while Tia nodded in agreement. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of something far more sinister and real. The comments from Watcher in the Dark started to become increasingly threatening and unnervingly specific. What initially seemed like harmless internet trolling turned sinister when the comments began mentioning personal details about Cyrus and Tia's lives. "Nice red shirt today, Cyrus," one comment read, despite Cyrus not wearing it in any videos. Another comment unnervingly noted, "Tia's favorite coffee shop isn't safe anymore." Tia, already feeling uneasy, was horrified when she started receiving direct messages on her social media accounts. The messages contained information about their daily routines, places they visited, and even conversations they had in private. One message chillingly stated, "Enjoyed your walk in the park, Tia. You should be more careful." As the details grew more intimate and specific, Cyrus and Tia's initial amusement turned to fear. They realized that this was more than just an internet troll. Someone was watching them closely. The once secure feeling of their home was replaced with paranoia and dread. "How does this person know so much about us?" Tia whispered, her voice trembling. Cyrus, equally shaken, tried to reassure her, but the gnawing fear that someone was watching their every move was inescapable. The siblings knew they had to take the threats seriously, but they were unsure where to start. The stalker's actions escalated rapidly. One evening, Cyrus and Tia returned home to find their front door slightly ajar. Heart-pounding, Cyrus pushed the door open, revealing the chaos inside. Drawers were pulled out, and their belongings were strewn across the floor. More disturbingly, items from their past, old photographs, childhood toys, and even Tia's long-lost diary were carefully placed in the middle of their rooms with handwritten notes attached. "Remember this?" one note read, sending chills down Tia's spine. Terrified, they called the police, but without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. The intrusion shattered any sense of safety they had left. They began to feel watched at all times, jumping at every creak and shadow. The paranoia grew, making it impossible to relax or sleep. In a desperate attempt to end the harassment, Cyrus decided to stop uploading videos altogether. He announced a hiatus on his channel, hoping the stalker would lose interest and move on. They also cut off all online communication, deleting social media accounts and changing phone numbers. Despite these efforts, the sense of unease lingered. Every unexpected sound or misplaced item felt like a reminder that their stalker was still out there, watching and waiting for the next move. Despite their efforts to cut off all contact, the stalker's presence grew more menacing. One fateful afternoon, Cyrus found himself alone in the house when the power suddenly cut out. The doors, which had been replaced and fortified after the break-in, were somehow locked from the outside. Panic set in as he realized he was trapped. He tried the windows, but they too were sealed shut. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a new message. Upload one final video, or Tia pays the price. With shaking hands, Cyrus had no choice but to comply. He set up his camera, feeling the oppressive weight of the stalker's watchful eyes. In a final, desperate plea, he recorded a video revealing their terrifying situation, detailing the stalking, the break-in, and now his entrapment. "This is not a joke," he said, voice breaking. "If you see this, know we're in real danger." As soon as he uploaded the video, a chilling sense of calm fell over the house. Moments later, a notification popped up, a comment from Watcher in the Dark. "I'm closer than you think," it read. The words seemed to echo through the silent room, amplifying Cyrus's dread. The video ended, but the horror did not. With Tia still out there and the stalker's whereabouts unknown, their fates hung in the balance. The viewers were left with a haunting question. What would happen next? The story concluded with an air of unresolved terror, leaving the audience with a chilling sense of dread and anticipation. Home Invasion Livestream. Troy and Maisie, a couple in their early 30s, were enjoying a quiet late night at home. The soft glow of their living room lamp cast a warm light over their cozy space, filled with comfortable furniture and framed photos of their adventures together. They settled on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between them, as they tuned into a popular YouTube livestream. The host, known for his explorations of supposedly haunted locations, was delving into an old, abandoned mansion rumored to be haunted. The atmosphere in their home was a mix of comfort and suspense, the perfect setting for a night of lighthearted scares. As the live stream progressed, the eerie ambience of the haunted house on the screen seemed to seep into their living room. The sound of creaking floors and distant whispers from the video mingled with the otherwise quiet night, setting the stage for the horror that was about to unfold in their own home. As they watched the live stream, Troy and Maisie became engrossed in the eerie exploration on their screen. The host's flashlight cut through the darkness of the haunted mansion, illuminating dusty hallways and cobweb-covered rooms. Suddenly, a faint creaking noise echoed through their living room. Troy glanced at Maisie, who shrugged it off, thinking it was just part of the video. However, the noises grew louder and more distinct, no longer syncing with the live stream. There were thuds and scraping sounds that seemed to reverberate through their home. Maisie paused the video, and the noises continued. They exchanged uneasy glances, the realization dawning that the sounds were coming from within their own house. "It's probably just the house settling," Troy suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Maisie nodded, trying to dismiss the growing fear in her chest. They resumed the video, but their attention was now divided, ears straining to catch any more sounds. The unsettling noises persisted, seeming to originate from the basement. A heavy, dragging sound sent chills down their spines. "Maybe it's the wind," Maisie offered weakly. But deep down, both of them knew it wasn't just their imagination. The cozy ambience of their home was now tinged with a palpable sense of dread, setting the stage for something far more terrifying. The unsettling noises continued, growing louder and more ominous. Troy and Maisie's unease turned to dread as they caught sight of something in their peripheral vision. On their computer screen, reflected in the webcam feed, was a shadowy figure moving slowly in the background of their living room. "Do you see that?" Maisie whispered, her voice trembling. Troy's eyes widened as he nodded, feeling a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The figure moved with an unnerving slowness, creeping closer to them with each passing second. Panic set in as they realized the noises were not from the video but from inside their house. The basement door creaked open, and the shadowy figure advanced, becoming more distinct in the dim light. Troy jumped up, knocking over the bowl of popcorn. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently, but his voice was barely above a whisper, paralyzed by fear. Maisie tried to reach for her phone, but her hands were shaking too much to dial. The figure in the reflection loomed closer, and just as they were about to scream for help, the screen suddenly went black. Their terrified screams echoed through the darkness, cut short as an unknown force overtook them. The computer remained on, casting a ghostly glow in the now silent room. The live stream frozen on the last haunting image of the empty room and the open basement door. The next morning, concerned neighbors noticed Troy and Maisie's front door ajar and called the authorities. When the police arrived, they discovered a scene of horror. Troy and Maisie's lifeless bodies were found in the living room, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror. The computer was still on, the live stream inexplicably still running. The screen showed an empty room with the basement door eerily wide open, the silence more haunting than any sound. Officers moved cautiously through the house, but there were no signs of an intruder, only the chilling evidence of something inexplicable and terrifying. The story concludes with the camera still broadcasting to a growing number of horrified viewers, the image of the empty room and the darkened basement door serving as a grim reminder of the unknown horrors that took place. The viewers were left with a haunting sense of dread and mystery, wondering what truly happened in those final, terrifying moments. The marked vlog. Gary and Talia, two college students in their early 20s, were hanging out in Talia's dorm room one evening. The room was dimly lit, a few posters on the walls and a cozy clutter of books and personal items creating a lived-in feel. They were browsing YouTube for something interesting to watch when a peculiar vlog caught their attention. Titled "My Last Day," the thumbnail showed a young man with a panicked expression. Intrigued and a bit amused, they clicked on the video. The vlogger's shaky voice filled the room, describing how he was being stalked by an unknown assailant. His eyes darted around nervously, and the dim lighting of his room added to the eerie atmosphere. "I don't know who they are or why they're after me," he whispered, his voice trembling. Gary and Talia exchanged curious glances, feeling a shiver of unease as they continued to watch, unaware of the horror that awaited them. As Gary and Talia continued watching the vlog, a creeping unease settled over them. The vlogger's descriptions started to sound eerily familiar. "I'm in a small room with a single window and a creaky wooden desk," the vlogger said, glancing around nervously. Talia's eyes widened as she looked at her own desk, which matched the description exactly. The vlogger continued, "There's a poster of a band on the wall and an old bookshelf full of textbooks." Gary glanced at Talia's bookshelf, his heart beginning to race. "This is weird," he muttered, his voice tinged with worry. As the vlogger's details became increasingly specific, describing the small plant on the windowsill and the unique pattern on the bedspread, Gary and Talia exchanged nervous glances. The descriptions matched Talia's room perfectly. The realization hit them like a cold wave. The vlogger was describing their exact location. "This can't be a coincidence," Talia whispered, her voice shaking. Gary nodded, feeling a knot of fear tightening in his stomach. They both sensed that something was terribly wrong, but they couldn't tear their eyes away from the screen, compelled to see what happened next, even as dread filled the room. The vlogger's panic intensified on the screen. His voice quivered as he described the stalker entering his home. "They're inside now," he whispered, his eyes darting towards his door. "I can hear them getting closer." The fear in his voice was palpable, sending chills down Gary and Talia's spines. As if on cue, A loud knock echoed through Talia's dorm room, making them jump. Their eyes widened in terror as they glanced at the door, then back at the screen. The vlogger had just mentioned hearing a knock at his door too. "Oh my God!" Talia breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Gary quickly muted the video, and they sat in stunned silence, listening. The knocking continued, steady and insistent. Each knock seemed to resonate with the heartbeat of their growing fear. "This isn't happening," Gary whispered, trying to steady his voice, but the fear was evident. The knocks persisted, becoming louder and more forceful. Talia's eyes were wide with panic. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Gary shook his head, unable to think clearly. The realization that the vlogger stalker was now targeting them was too horrifying to comprehend. They clung to each other, paralyzed by fear, as the knocks grew more aggressive. The once cozy dorm room now felt like a trap, with an unknown terror lurking just outside their door, waiting to make its move. The video ended abruptly with the vlogger's terrified scream, leaving Gary and Talia in a state of shock. The room plunged into an eerie silence, the sudden absence of sound amplifying their fear. They barely had time to react before the door to Talia's dorm room creaked open, and the shadowy figure from the video appeared inside, its presence suffocating. Gary and Talia were trapped, their escape routes cut off. The figure moved towards them, and their screams echoed through the dorm, then abruptly stopped. The terror of the night culminated in a suffocating silence. The next morning, Talia's dorm room was eerily quiet. Friends who came looking for them found the room empty, with no trace of Gary or Talia. The computer was still on, the vlog still running, showing the last frame of the empty room. The mystery of their disappearance left a chilling sense of dread, haunting those who discovered the still-running video. Streaming from hell, Gustavo and Nora, a couple in their mid-20s, were spending a quiet night in Gustavo's living room. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. They sat close together on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the glow from Gustavo's laptop screen illuminating their faces as they browsed through a playlist of scary YouTube videos. The thrill of spooky content was their favorite way to spend a night in, enjoying the shared jumps and chills. The atmosphere was perfect for a night of scares, with the faint sound of wind rustling the trees outside adding to the eerie ambience. The room was cozy, yet there was an undercurrent of suspense in the air. They laughed and teased each other as they clicked on various videos, their playful banter masking the growing tension that each new clip brought. Little did they know, the real horror was just a click away. As they continued scrolling through the playlist, a video titled "Replay from Hell" caught their attention. Intrigued by the ominous title, Gustavo and Nora exchanged curious glances and decided to click on it. The video began with a dark, grainy scene, the shaky camera footage adding to its unsettling nature. A series of terrifying events played out on the screen, objects moving on their own, shadows darting past, and eerie noises echoing in the background. As they watched, a strange sense of déjà vu crept over them. The layout of the room in the video seemed oddly familiar. Nora squinted at the screen, her heart starting to race. "Gus, doesn't that look like your living room?" she whispered, a hint of fear in her voice. Gustavo leaned in closer, his eyes widening in realization. The couch, the lamp, even the pattern on the rug, it was all identical to their surroundings. Their unease grew as the video continued, depicting their living room with unsettling accuracy. They saw a figure resembling Gustavo walk across the room, followed by a figure resembling Nora. The realization hit them like a cold wave. The video was depicting them in real time. They sat frozen, unable to tear their eyes away from the screen, as the sense of dread began to consume them. As they watched in horror, The video showed a dark figure slowly entering their living room, moving with a menacing grace. The figure's shadowy form was indistinct, almost like a living silhouette, but its presence was unmistakably threatening. The camera's perspective shifted to show the figure approaching the couch where Gustavo and Nora sat, its movements deliberate and predatory. Panic surged through them. Gustavo tried to stop the video, frantically clicking the pause button and hitting the escape key, but the controls were unresponsive. The video continued to play, ignoring their desperate attempts to shut it down. "What the hell is going on?" Gustavo muttered, his voice shaking. Nora clutched his arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to get out of here," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. But despite her words, they both remained rooted to the spot, compelled to watch the unfolding nightmare. On the screen, the dark figure was now standing right behind the couch, its shadow falling over their real-time counterparts. The figure leaned in, and they could almost feel its cold breath on the back of their necks. The palpable sense of dread was overwhelming, every second stretching into an eternity as the figure's hand reached out towards them. Just as the figure was about to make contact, the screen flickered and distorted, adding to the surreal terror of the moment. Gustavo and Nora's hearts pounded in unison, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were trapped in a horrifying loop, unable to escape the dark figure closing in on them, both on screen and in their living room. The dark figure from the video suddenly materialized in their living room, its shadowy form looming over Gustavo and Nora. Paralyzed with fear, they watched as it stepped closer, matching every move from the terrifying video. Desperation kicked in, and they scrambled to their feet, attempting to flee. But the figure was too fast. It overpowered them effortlessly, its cold grip mirroring the exact sequence from the video. Gustavo and Nora's screams were cut short, their struggle ending as swiftly as it had begun. The final scene on the screen showed their lifeless bodies sprawled on the floor, eerily identical to the vision they had just witnessed. As the video ended, the description updated with chilling precision, listing their names and address. The story concluded with the haunting implication that the dark figure would now seek out the next victims who dared to watch the replay from hell, leaving a trail of terror and death in its wake. Echoes of the dark web. Fred and Alyssa, a couple in their mid-20s, were spending a late night at Fred's apartment. The room was dimly lit, with the soft glow of the computer screen casting shadows on the walls. They were browsing the internet, looking for something interesting to watch when they accidentally stumbled upon a strange YouTube video. The title was cryptic, hinting at its dark web origins, but their curiosity got the better of them. The video began with grainy footage of a bizarre ritual. Hooded figures chanted in a language neither of them could understand, their movements slow and deliberate. Suddenly, a distorted voice cut through the eerie chanting, delivering a chilling warning. "All who watch this video are cursed," it intoned, the words warping and echoing unnaturally. Fred and Alyssa exchanged amused glances and laughed it off. "It's just a prank," Fred said, smirking. Alyssa nodded, though she couldn't shake the slight unease that crept up her spine. They dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, unaware that the real horror was just beginning. After watching the video, Alyssa began experiencing unsettling phenomena. She heard faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and shadows flickered just out of the corner of her eye. Initially, she shrugged it off as her imagination, but the occurrences became more frequent and harder to ignore. One night, as they sat in the living room, Alyssa suddenly stiffened. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, glancing nervously around the room. Fred looked up from his phone, shaking his head. "It's probably just the wind or the neighbors," he reassured her, though his tone was dismissive. Alyssa tried to relax, but the whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to move with a will of their own. Then, something strange happened. The eerie video they had watched began playing again on Fred's computer, despite neither of them touching it. The screen flickered to life, showing the same hooded figures and the ominous ritual. "Fred, look!" Alyssa exclaimed, pointing at the screen. Fred frowned and got up to stop the video, but as soon as he closed it, it would start again on its own. "This is getting weird," Fred admitted, a hint of concern in his voice, but he still tried to downplay it, thinking it was just a glitch. Alyssa, however, felt a growing sense of dread. The video's repetition seemed almost deliberate, as if it had a sinister purpose. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had invited something dark and dangerous into their home. Alyssa's behavior became increasingly erratic and frightening. Fred often found her staring off into space, mumbling incoherently. One night, he walked into the living room and saw her having a conversation with an empty corner. "Alyssa, who are you talking to?" he asked, his voice trembling with unease. She turned to him with vacant eyes and a cryptic smile. "They're here, Fred. They're always here," she replied, her voice sounding unnaturally distant. The whispers grew louder, filling the apartment with a constant, eerie murmur. Shadows moved more prominently, no longer confined to the corners of their vision. They seemed to pulse and shift, almost as if they were alive. The once cozy apartment felt oppressive and malevolent, every corner hiding unseen horrors. Each time the cursed video played, Alyssa's condition worsened. Her eyes darkened, losing their familiar warmth, and her voice took on a guttural, almost otherworldly tone. "We need to get out of here," Fred said, but every attempt to stop the video failed. It continued to replay, the ritual becoming more intense with each iteration. Fred's concern turned to fear as he watched Alyssa's transformation. Her movements became jerky and unnatural, and she began speaking in tongues he couldn't understand. It was as if the entity from the video was taking over her body, erasing the woman he loved. Desperation clawed at Fred as he tried to pull Alyssa back from the brink, but the malevolent force seemed too strong. The boundaries between their world and the one in the video blurred, trapping them in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. In a desperate attempt to end the nightmare, Fred decided to destroy his computer. He grabbed a hammer from the kitchen and approached the device with grim determination. "This has to stop," he muttered to himself, raising the hammer above his head. But before he could bring it down, Alyssa, now fully possessed and no longer herself, lunged at him with a terrifying strength. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and love, were now cold and empty. She snarled, her voice a guttural mix of Alyssa's and something far more sinister. "You can't stop it," she hissed, grappling with Fred and knocking the hammer from his hands. He struggled against her, but the entity controlling her was far too powerful. Fred's pleas for Alyssa to fight back went unheard. She overpowered him, pinning him to the floor. Her face twisted in a malicious grin. She whispered, "You belong to us now," before delivering a fatal blow. Fred's vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was the computer screen, still playing the cursed video on an endless loop. As the life drained from Fred's body, the video description updated in real time, now listing his and Alyssa's names and address. The chilling final scene showed Alyssa standing over Fred's lifeless form, her eyes dark and hollow. The video continued to play, the ritual starting anew, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to stumble upon it. The curse cycle was far from over. The entity would move on to claim more lives, spreading its dark influence through the shadows of the digital world, preying on the curious and the unwary. The screen flickered, and the whispers grew louder, echoing through the now empty apartment, ready to ensnare the next viewer who dared to watch.